Hey everyone, it's Alexi Uzas here from Exile Entertainment. In this video, I'm going to show you how to break down your budget for your short or feature film. Now, before we dive in, I want to let you know that spots are available for our Producing Accelerator program that shows you not just how to break your budget down in more details, but more importantly, shows you the steps that you need to take to be able to finance and produce your feature films. So if you're interested in learning more about that program, stick around until the end of this video. And for the best filmmaking advice, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to be notified when we post a video. Step one of breaking down your budget is to get out of your budget spreadsheet, because the most important place that you can start for your budget is with your finance plan. You might be wondering, well, what the hell do you mean by this? Well, it's not the most useful or beneficial way for you to be creating a budget without any reference to what your finance looks like. And this is absolutely the number one pitfall that I see up and coming filmmakers fall into. So what that looks like is, rather than looking at the finance, going straight into your budget and starting to break down the script and starting to put in all those costs, then coming to a final figure for your budget, but having absolutely no idea how you're going to raise the finance to actually achieve that budget. The better way to do this is to start with your finance plan and understand how you're going to raise finance for that particular project, and importantly, knowing what the finance plan should look like for that film, because not all films are born equally. Not all films should have a budget of $10 million or $1 million or $5 million. Each film is extremely unique, and the finance plan for it needs to be absolutely tailored to that project. So you need to be looking at things like the level of cast that you're going to be able to attach, your level of experience as filmmakers, the genre of the film, the ability of the film to generate a return, and at what level. So these are the things that you need to be thinking about in order to decide what the correct level of finance is for the project. Only once you know that do you have an idea or a ballpark around where your budget should be sitting. So that is absolutely the first step to creating the budget. It's actually getting out of the budget, getting into your finance plan, and understanding what the correct level of finance is for that particular project. The next step is to determine your below the line production costs. So at this stage, we just want to focus on your below the line production costs, so not post-production, obviously nothing above the line, because we really want to understand what the hard costs of making this film is going to be. And really, one of the most important aspects of your below the line costs are your labor costs, your wages, because these often make up the vast majority of your expenses on an independent film, and actually pretty much on any film other than when you're at that high level and your above the line costs are kind of astronomical because of the level of cast that you're attaching. So those below the line costs are really important to determine as early on in the process as possible. What you want to do is basically first look at the crew rates and make sure that you're getting the award rates that are applicable for your country or your state, and working out what the weekly rate is for each crew member and getting that into your budget, and then multiplying that obviously by the number of weeks that you're going to be shooting, or that you're proposing that you're going to be shooting. And of course, any additional things like fringes need to be calculated or factored into that. So once you've done that for the crew, you want to do the same thing for the cast. Now, if you're just preparing your first top line budget, then this can be done in a rough way, right? Because you may not have a full-blown schedule at that point. So you want to kind of rough it in at this point, and just to get an understanding of what those labor costs are going to look like. Once the labor costs are in, at that point, you want to start looking at your equipment costs. So things like your camera hire, your lighting hire, your group equipment. Those are the real expensive items on an independent film. I'll give you some tips about how you can bring some of these items down in costs as well once I run you through a few more. So get the equipment costs in there. Of course, catering is quite easy to work out, and so you want to get that in there pretty quickly. Try and just use a per head cost per person, and then multiply that by the number of people and the number of days. You then want to look at things like locations. If of course you don't have rates for this just yet, you want to budget something, so you need to put something in there as a starting point. Now again, if you know what your finance looks like, if you know what your target is in terms of what the budget needs to be, this becomes easier, because once you have your labor costs in there, you can see how much is left, and you know how much you can apportion to certain items. And again, I'm going to come back to why this is so important later in the video. So get all your location costs in there. Then you want to get costs in there into your art department. So things like production design, costume design, hair and makeup, make sure they're all in there. Any stunts is a really important one. So stunts and safety, that's where there can be a lot of costs that go a little bit under budgeted in terms of films. So you want to make sure, again, you get some rough estimates in there. Now, while you're creating the below the line costs, there are going to be a number of things that you need to get quotes for. So the first thing that you should be doing is putting estimates in there. Then you need to be going out there to suppliers and getting costs. And I think it's important to do this as early on as possible. As soon as you've created that first draft, you want to get out there and getting quotes. So I won't take you through each of the items in a budget on this video, but for now, it's important to know that you start with your labor costs first, then your equipment costs, and then go through all the other items that are going to be below the line. Once you've got those worked out, then the area that I typically move to next is usually your other expenses. So expenses that aren't in post-production, they come after post-production. These are things like legals, accounts, insurance, any finance costs, and marketing costs. The reason I like to get those in at this stage is because those are often fairly fixed, or they're in proportion to the overall budget. So usually legals and accounts are around 1% of the total budget. So again, if you know what your finance figure is, if you know what your budget target is, you can already work out these costs. Insurance is fairly standard across the board. So your E&O insurance needs to go in there. Your production insurance should go in there. Again, if you're not sure of what those costs are because you've never incurred them before, go out there and get quotes for those sorts of things. With finance costs, it depends if there's any rebates or tax credits that you're getting that are going to require you to go out a loan. And of course, there's going to be fees involved with that. Again, something for another video, but if you know what those finance costs are, which again, if you've done your finance plan, you will know roughly what those costs are, then you want to get those in. Marketing is an area that a lot of people have questions over. I recommend putting something in there for marketing. The most important items that you can have are a poster and a trailer, more than anything else, and stills. So they're the three items. Anything else is additional, but just keep in mind that really the focus should be putting as much money into the production as possible, because if you attach a distributor or a sales agent to the project, they can actually create those marketing assets other than the stills, because they have to be taken during production, but they can create the poster and the trailer, so they can pick up those costs at a later stage. Once I've got those costs in there, then I want to move to post-production and put some estimates in there, again, based off previous work. And of course, if you haven't done it before, then go out and get some quotes. Then lastly, I'd be going above the line and looking at what can be factored into those lines. So writer's fee, if you've already agreed to something, I would put that in first. Then you want to look at your above the line cast, get them in there. And then of course, producer and director, you want to add them in last. So that's the way that I would usually work through a budget. And of course, there's a bit of work in there if you've never done it before in terms of getting quotes and things like that. But again, focusing on those below the line costs is really important because there's less flexibility in that part of the budget. You know, above the line, your producers in there, your directors in there, the key creatives are in there, the ones that have a real kind of vested interest in the film, who are going to get the most reward out of the film if it does really well. So their fees are a little bit more malleable. With post-production, again, it is a little bit more malleable because those costs now have really kind of been driven down dramatically over the past like 10 or 20 years. And you can often find post-production companies that can come in and really do all the work for you and can also actually take an equity position in the film. So there is more room to kind of negotiate, and often your post-production suppliers are people that you've worked with before, so you have that long-term relationship in place, and so it is a little bit more malleable. Your other costs, like I said earlier, are a little bit fixed, so you want to get them in. And then below the line, that's where you have really less room to kind of move things around, so you want to get those costs in early. And the last thing that you want to add in there is your contingency. So typically that's 10% of your above the line and below the line costs. So you want to make sure that that's factored in right at the end of the budget there and calculated so that your total budget includes that contingency, which is just a buffer for you that you can have, you know, going into production, knowing that if there are certain items that come under or over in this case for actually spending contingency, then you have that buffer in there kind of baked into the budget. So don't forget about adding the contingency in there, really important. And the most important piece of advice that I can give you for preparing a breakdown of your budget is to actually do the breakdown of the budget yourself. Again, one of the biggest mistakes that I see filmmakers making is hiring a line producer to prepare the budget for them. I think this is absolutely a recipe for disaster because few reasons. Firstly, the line producer has no idea what the target is for the finance. So again, if you haven't created a finance plan and you've just gone and attached the line producer, then they're not trying to create a budget that's based on the amount of finance that you can raise for that project. So it could just like their budget could just be wildly different depending on how they want to budget it. Are they going to put in commercial rates or award rates? Do they care how much you're spending for locations? Do they not care? So the line producer's not really going in there and approaching the budget as a producer should, which is looking at how they're going to actually make this project happen, how it's going to actually materialize. If you have attached a line producer or you're intending to do that, I can't stress enough that you shouldn't do that. You should absolutely be preparing the budget yourself, or at least the first few drafts of it. You should only be attaching the line producer to further refine the budget that you've already created, to basically go in there and look at whether there are any areas that you might have missed, where there are any things that you've miscalculated or that you have under budgeted or over budgeted. But the starting point, if you are the producer, and you could also be the writer director, but you're producing the project. But if you have ownership of the project, if it's your responsibility, which if you're the producer it is, then you absolutely need to be preparing that budget. You need to know how you're arriving at certain figures, why you're arriving at certain figures, and you need to be the one making those decisions. If you're taking money away from one department and putting it into another department, you need to understand why that's happening. You need to be the one that's making the decisions for that to happen. So this is a point that I can't stress enough. It's absolutely one of, if not it's the biggest mistake that I see when it comes to budgeting, hands down. So make sure you don't make it. Make sure that even if spreadsheets scare the hell out of you, go out there and try and learn. Take a basic course in terms of how to put together a spreadsheet, try and find some resources online, or work with a company to learn how to create budgets, but then make sure that you're the one that's actually putting that budget together. It's really helpful to do this if you're a producer-director team, to actually do it together as a team. That's really the best way that you can put together a budget, so that you're looking at it from the financial point of view, the logistical point of view, and the creative point of view all at once. So you're getting all the relevant inputs that you need to be able to create the most accurate budget. And like I said, of course, after that, you can get a line producer on, you can create a full schedule, and at that point, you can kind of narrow down on the budget further, but make sure that you're the one as a producer driving that process and that you're responsible for it. Some of the best ways to cost save in your budget are the following, and this is particularly when it comes to below the line. The number one way to bring down costs below the line is going into your labor costs, so your crew and your cast rates, and bringing down the number of days or weeks that you're in production and pre-production. Because your labor costs are so high when you're making a film, you're producing a film, the more that you can bring down the days or weeks that you're actually on set, the more money that you can save. So that's easily one of the quickest and most effective ways of bringing down your budget. Now, another way to do this with labor costs that isn't as preferred but is also effective is using deferrals. So having your cast or crew defer part of their fees. So that's another way that you can bring down those labor costs, but really the number one way that should be prioritized or preferred is bringing down the number of days or weeks that you're in pre or in production. Another great way is also to do with your shooting style. So, the first thing is shooting exteriors daytime is much more affordable than shooting interiors where you're going to need lightings, or of course exteriors where you're also going to need lighting. So that's another way, because your lighting expenses are also very expensive, and you don't get too much, like you can get decent discounts from lighting suppliers, but there's only so much that they can drive their costs down, because that's equipment that they're leasing out. They could be leasing it to other productions. So you might get a decent deal, but those expenses are going to really add up. Same with gripping equipment. So if you're going to need dollies and cranes and steady cams, those expenses are going to go up. So if you can, again, think of ways to shoot the film in a way that's going to bring those costs down, that's going to be a real money saver for you. And I think between those two, your labor costs and your equipment costs, they're really the main ways that you should be looking to drive down costs below the line. Another one would be stunts. So minimizing the stunts that you're going to have. That's another great way to bring down your costs further, because again, if you're doing stunts, you need safety supervisors, you need stunt people, you need to rehearse, like you need more time for rehearsal. Then of course, if there's any equipment associated with the stunt, so all these things really start to add up. So that's another way to kind of bring down your costs. So one thing that's really important to note is that all of these things that I'm mentioning are of course going to affect the creative. So when creating a budget, when breaking down a budget, not only do you need to understand what the finance is and the finance structure so that you know what your target budget is, but you absolutely need to be thinking about the creative, because any decisions that you're making in the budget are going to affect the creative. And so you need to know whether those are things that can be achieved. The best way to think about your budget is to think of it kind of flying in line with your finance plan and your screenplay. So those three things always need to be kind of worked on and tweaked and amended together. So you should never be amending your budget without reference to your finance or the script, or you shouldn't change your script without reference to the budget or the finance plan, and you shouldn't really be changing your finance plan without reference to the budget again or the screenplay. So you want to make sure that these things are always aligned and you're looking at the three. And when it comes to the budget, know that any changes that you're making in there are going to affect the creative. So you need to make sure that all the people who are involved in that decision making are on board. And again, that goes back to my point about the line producer. It's more important to have the producer and the director involved in those discussions. Then of course, consulting people like the DP, any other heads of department, your line producer, your AD. But again, coming back to it, the producer and the director need to be the ones then making the decisions about what's going to stay or what's going to go out of the budget. Okay, so that's it for this video. If you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and leave any comments in the comments section below, and let me know if there are any vital parts of the budget breakdown process that you think are really useful for filmmakers to know about or to have on their radar. And of course, if you're interested in working with either me or a member of my team, then I encourage you to check out the link in the description below so that you can learn more about our Producing Accelerator program. And of course, the way that we approach financing through the accelerator is the way that I've described in this video. We look at what the appropriate finance structure for your film is going to be. Then we look at how we can craft a budget that's going to fit within that financial structure. And then we make sure that the screenplay can fit within those parameters, because once we line up those fundamentals, we know the film has the best chance of getting into production. So if you're interested in learning more, if you're interested in working with us at Exile, head to the link in the description. You'll be able to set up a time to speak with either me or a member of my team, and we'll work out if the accelerator is the right fit for your project. And don't forget to check out these videos next on how to up your filmmaking game.